My son George and my husband Mike hustled out of the house. I waved them off. It's Sunday today, so I thought I'd relax. As I was hanging laundry, the sound of a ringing phone reached my ears. "Hello, is this George's residence?" A woman's voice came through from the other end. "Are you a family member of George?" "Yes." I couldn't grasp the situation, but my heart rate quickened. "This is Symes from Mayo General Hospital. George was involved in an accident and has been brought in by ambulance." My mind went blank. George, who had just left the house energetically. "We're about to perform emergency surgery." "Hello? Are you all right?" The woman, Symes, inquired, noticing my silence. "Yes, the hospital, right?" "Mayo General Hospital. Please come as soon as possible." "Yes." I responded impulsively and hung up. I needed to get to the hospital fast. I tried to contact Mike while getting ready, but there was no response despite multiple attempts. So, I called Mike's office. I explained the situation and asked them to pass the message to Mike. But they told me Mike hadn't come in. For now, my focus was to head to the hospital. I reassured myself everything would be okay as I was about to step out, when suddenly someone burst in. I was so startled, I couldn't recognize who it was at first. "Mom, I forgot my lunch." Noticing my shock, George looked into my face with concern. "Mom? Did me coming back suddenly surprise you?" All sorts of emotions were swirling inside me. "Mom?" Tears started to spill from my eyes. "Mom, what's wrong?" "My name is Rosie. I'm a 45-year-old housewife, just like any other, with a husband and a son. After graduating from a local high school, I went to culinary school, but instead of getting a job at a hotel or restaurant, I ended up working part-time at a bento shop. While my peers have gone on to open their own places or become chefs at famous restaurants, I feel like I haven't accomplished anything. But I have no regrets. I have a precious family now. It might be an ordinary story, but I am happy. I met my husband, Mike, while working part-time at the bento shop. The shop did deliveries, and Mike worked at one of the delivery destinations. Since Mike ordered lunch almost every day, I figured he was single, but I never imagined he would approach me. Seeing my puzzled look when he asked for my contact, Mike handed me a piece of paper with his number. Even though I was given his contact, I didn't know what to do and never reached out. I thought it would be awkward, but Mike's attitude didn't change, and gradually, I became conscious of him. Then, one day, I noticed Mike's absence during my deliveries and felt unexpectedly lonely. A week without seeing Mike, I finally mustered the courage to send an email to the contact he had given me. "Have not seen you recently, are you okay?" I remember being incredibly nervous over just asking how he was. Would he reply? Maybe he no longer cared about me. While I was lost in thought, a reply came late at night. It was nothing serious. He had just been on a business trip. "I'll be back at the office next week, so I look forward to your delicious lunch again." Though I wasn't the one making them, it made me happy. I couldn't wait for the weekend to be over and for Monday to come, feeling restless for just 2 days off. Then on Monday, I got ready more carefully than usual. I took the order and prepared the lunchbox for delivery to Mike's company. The moment I saw Mike after a while, I felt my heart beating faster. My hands were trembling as I handed over the lunchbox. After receiving the payment, Mike whispered, "I was happy to get your email. Can I email you again?" I nodded vigorously, and as he said, "Message you later." As he walked away, I realized I had fallen in love. Mike and I started communicating more and soon began dating, eventually getting married. After our marriage, I continued working part-time for a while but decided to quit when I got pregnant. That's how I became a housewife, busying myself with daily chores for my husband and son. It wasn't always easy, but I felt a sense of purpose. George grew up healthy, and we became the picture-perfect happy family. But it was around the time George entered middle school. Mike, who had been supporting us well, got a promotion offer. "They want me to become the assistant manager," he mentioned one evening over drinks, with a sigh mixed in. "That's amazing!" I exclaimed, noticing Mike seemed troubled despite my joy. "Aren't you happy?" I had never worked in an office, so I always thought getting promoted was something to be happy about, but maybe that's not the case? "It is something to be happy about," Mike murmured somewhat forlornly. "I'm sorry. I got carried away by myself. There must be something I don't understand. It's probably not something to pry too deeply into." As I thought this, Mike started to share bit by bit. "It'll be busier than now. There'll be more business trips." His voice sounded almost childlike, seeking comfort. "It'll be lonely, won't it?" Was he worried about me? Before we were married, Mike's job was always busy with business trips, overtime, and working weekends, and I often expressed my loneliness. It's not just a matter of being young. I really made Mike worry back then. Yet, Mike's sincere approach gradually reassured me, and I became okay with not seeing him for days on end. Mike still remembers those days and occasionally checks to see how I'm feeling. "I'm fine now. George is here, too," I tried to say as cheerfully as possible. "I want to wait for you no matter how busy you are, and keep this place a safe haven for you." "Is that so?" Finally looking at me, Mike smiled. Feeling my determination, Mike didn't say anything more. Later, Mike's promotion was confirmed, and we celebrated at home. George was happy, and seeing Mike's bright face reassured me and renewed my determination. I was sure to strengthen our family bonds more than ever before. That's what I thought, but since Mike became the assistant manager, weekend work and short business trips became more frequent. It was days not much different from before. However, long business trips to distant places started to increase soon after. Every time he returned, Mike was exhausted, often going to bed without eating. If he was like this at home, what was it like on his business trips? Was he eating properly? Was he getting enough sleep? While Mike was away, I was consumed with worry. But Mike called or emailed every day, so I felt I shouldn't show my anxiety. On his days off, he would take George fishing or make time for the family, showing he cared about us. I had to accept Mike no matter what. That's what I thought. By the time I got used to Mike's long business trips, George had become a high school student. My load should lighten a bit more than before. Maybe I should start a hobby to make the most of my time alone, so as not to worry Mike. The home phone rang at 8 p.m. George hadn't come home yet from club activities. Could it be Mike calling from a business trip? Why would he call the landline instead of my mobile? "Hello?" I answered the phone with a cheerful voice. But the person on the other end didn't say anything. "Hello?" Thinking it strange, I responded again. Still, there was no sound from the other end of the phone. Prank calls still exist, it seems. Disgusted, I put down the phone. Then, there was a clatter from the direction of the yard. Curious, I looked outside to see a single empty can rolling around. Our home is surrounded by a fence, so unless someone threw it over, there's no way an empty can could just end up there. Even on windy days, this has never happened. That day ended with just that incident, but the silent calls and trash being thrown into the yard continued from time to time. Not only that, but strange letters started appearing in our mailbox. The letters were filled with cursed words, which was creepy. Wondering what to do, I first talked to a neighbor, and it seems that some elementary school kids in the area do engage in pranks like these. It's better not to worry about it too much, I was advised, and I convinced myself that was right. In any era, elementary school kids will play pranks, I told myself, trying not to let the ongoing mischief bother me. Would elementary school kids really make prank calls at 8 p.m.? With that question lingering in my heart, a year passed, and then the situation suddenly changed. It was on a Sunday. George had club activities, and Mike had left early in the morning for a business trip the following day, so our home was bustling from the morning. After preparing George's lunch and breakfast, I saw the two of them off in a hurry. Barely having a moment to breathe, I started the washing machine and began cleaning. It's Sunday, and everywhere would be crowded anyway. I thought I'd relax until George got back. While I was hanging the laundry that had just been washed, I heard the phone ring inside the house. Looking at the clock, it was just past 8 a.m. Who could it be this early in the morning? Thinking it might be another prank call, I apprehensively answered the phone. Hello? Is this George's house? A woman's voice came through from the other end, sounding a bit rushed. Maybe she was in a hurry. She spoke somewhat quickly. Yes, it is, I replied, trying to gauge the situation. Are you a family member of George? Yes. I couldn't understand what was happening, but my heart started to race. I'm Symes from Mayo General Hospital. George was involved in an accident and has been brought in by ambulance. My mind went blank. George, who had just left the house cheerfully. We're about to perform emergency surgery. Hello? Are you okay? Symes, the woman on the phone, asked, noticing my silence. Yes. The hospital, right? I need to calm down. I tried to reassure myself, but it wasn't working. Perhaps she noticed my confusion. Maybe she's used to situations like this. Symes informed me with a calm voice. It's Mayo General Hospital. Please come immediately. Yes, I replied impulsively and hung up. I understood the situation, but my emotions couldn't catch up. But I need to get to the hospital quickly. While getting ready, I tried to contact Mike. I knew I needed to be strong, but the problem was too big to handle alone. I didn't want to worry Mike, but it would be strange not to inform him. Making excuses to myself, I wanted to hear Mike's voice to ease my anxiety a bit. However, no matter how many times I called Mike's mobile phone, there was no answer. I hesitated to send an email, thinking that if he didn't notice a call, he might not notice an email for a while. Maybe he stopped by his office before the trip. I tried calling Mike's office. Despite it being Sunday, it seemed some people were working overtime. I explained the situation to the person who answered and asked them to get a message to Mike. But for some reason, Mike hadn't come in at work, nor was there any business trip scheduled. Already a bit panicked over George's situation, not knowing Mike's whereabouts added to my anxiety. I took a deep breath to calm down. For now, I decided to head to the hospital. Maybe there was just a misunderstanding with Mike's situation. I sent an email just in case, and decided to wait for Mike's response. I have to be strong, I decided to protect this house, George, and Mike. Repeating this to myself, I was about to leave when someone came in forcefully. I was so surprised, I couldn't recognize who it was at first. Mom, I forgot my lunch. Noticing my surprise, George looked at my face with concern. Mom? Did I startle you by coming back suddenly? A mix of confusion, relief, and suspicion swirled within me. Seeing George's face, I regained my composure. George was right in front of me. I cupped George's face with both hands, confirming his presence. That's when tears started to fall from my eyes. "Mom? What's wrong?" Seeing George panic, I couldn't help but smile. George was okay. I began to regain my composure slowly. "I've already told them I'll be late to practice, so we have time. Tell me what happened." Seeing my tears, something he had never seen before, George was worried. Oh, when had he grown up so much? With that thought, I explained the morning's phone call. "I was in an accident? But look, I'm perfectly fine," George said, jumping around to prove his point. Trying to make me laugh. He was trying to reassure me. Maybe we should call the hospital just to check? If there's someone else with the same name, it could be serious. Was George always this sensible? Accompanied by George, I moved to the living room where the phone was. I called the hospital I had noted earlier. "I received a call earlier about a family member being brought in by ambulance. I'm the mom," I explained to the woman who answered the phone. What was the name of the person who called? As I tried to remember, the hold music stopped, and the woman came back on the line to tell me. "I'm sorry for the wait. Unfortunately, we have no record of your family member being brought in." "What?" I exclaimed in surprise. After apologizing to the woman on the phone, I hung up. "So, the hospital didn't know either?" George sighed. "I'm sorry. I just panicked. I started to feel guilty." "No, Mom's not to blame. It's natural to be shocked if you thought I was taken to the hospital. I'd be sad if you weren't worried." George was smiling. "But still, why would we get a prank call like that? Could it be some kind of scam?" George seemed to be analyzing the situation calmly. "Just forget it. Anyways, I'm just glad you're okay." Feeling much calmer now, I was about to send George off again. "Here, take your lunch. Just because you said you'd be late doesn't mean you have time to dawdle, right?" But George stood still, looking at me, not moving. "George, what's wrong?" "I'm fine now." Before I could finish, George interjected. "You have something else on your mind, don't you?" His direct gaze made me feel like I couldn't escape. "This is more important than any club activity. Let me hear it." I always thought of him as a child, but the George standing before me now seemed fully grown. I talked to George about the pranks we've had before. This call must be a prank too. Thinking back, anxiety welled up inside me. Trash thrown into our yard, creepy letters sent to us. Why do we have to endure this? Sensing my anxiety, George made a call from his mobile phone. "Mom, I'm going to skip practice today." With everything that's been happening, and who knows, maybe the person who called today is watching you from somewhere. George smiled, trying to reassure me. "But you have a match coming up. I can't let a mere prank interfere with my son's activities. I have to manage on my own." "It's okay, Mom," George said, smiling despite my worries. He's considerate, making sure I don't overdo it. Today's just a voluntary practice anyway. It's going to be short, and some people aren't even going to show up. Then he sat down on the living room sofa. "Are you sure you're okay with this?" "Yep." George sat on the sofa and immediately started pondering something. "I'll make some coffee." My words seemed not to reach him. When George focuses on something, he becomes oblivious to the sounds and voices around him. What could he be thinking about? A way to handle the pranks? When I placed the coffee in front of George, he turned to me quietly and began to speak. "I was going to keep this to myself, Mom, but it might be related to what's happening now." His voice was a murmur. "Do you have any idea what it could be?" George nodded quietly and began to share bit by bit. Please try to stay calm as you listen. After that introduction, George shared something I could hardly believe. Mike might be having an affair. On the day I went on a day trip with my friend. That day, George, who was in the midst of test period, came home early from school. Then, he saw Mike and a young woman leaving our house. Mike hurriedly explained, "I just came back to grab something I forgot while I was out. She's just a colleague," and left quickly. On another day, when George was returning from a sports meet in the next town and entered a restaurant with friends, he saw Mike and the woman arguing. It was the same woman who had come out of our house before. The way they were arguing didn't seem like a boss and subordinate. Hearing all this, I felt an unpleasant premonition. Yet, I want to believe in Mike. He's always been thoughtful, making sure I don't feel lonely. Such a person couldn't betray me. Thank you for telling me, George. But I want to believe in Mike. I thought you'd say that. George showed a smile. If you're going to be home, do you mind if I take a rest? I'm feeling a bit tired. Turning my back to George, who nodded, I headed to the bedroom. I thought about lying down, but George's story kept me preoccupied. I reached for the drawer of Mike's desk in the bedroom. It's okay, there won't be anything. He wouldn't betray me. Yet, I wanted some solid reassurance. Inside the drawer was Mike's planner. It's always with him, so why forget it now of all times? My hands trembled as I opened it. The page for jotting down monthly plans. I checked today's date. No matter how many times I checked, there was clearly a heart drawn on today's date. The call to his office revealed no business trip scheduled. The lack of contact. Pieces started to connect. What do I want to do? I still want to believe in Mike. But I also wanted to know the truth. I was about to send an email decisively, when I suddenly burst out laughing. An email I intended to send earlier about George being taken to the hospital was still unsent. I hadn't imagined it would come to this. I felt somewhere that today would be a turning point in my life. I quickly sent an email. I've contacted your office. I know there's no business trip, so please come home soon, and decided to rest for a while. About an hour later, Mike came home. He seemed angry, making loud footsteps and causing a commotion. As I went downstairs, he confronted me. Why did you contact my office on your own? Don't you trust me? He was angry without hearing any explanation. Mike has a bad habit of getting angry unilaterally when things don't go his way. I was used to it. This could ruin our trust. Do you understand? Mike continued without letting me get a word in. Realizing it was futile to argue, I just listened to him for a while. Eventually, he calmed down. And I started to speak. This morning, I got a call saying George was taken to the hospital. I thought I had to contact you. Mike looked at me blankly. I called your mobile many times, but couldn't reach you, so I contacted the office. Mike remained silent. The office said there was no business trip scheduled. At first, I thought it was a communication error. Mike seemed to be pondering what to say. So, you came back because it was bad for the office to be contacted, right? What were you planning to do today? No, from today on. I pressed him for answers. As Mike was about to retort, George appeared from the living room. Why don't you come here instead of talking there? Seeing George, Mike looked surprised. George? Weren't you taken to the hospital? Oh, haven't you heard yet? It seems like it was a prank call. I'm perfectly fine, George explained, looking bewildered. Mike headed towards the living room. Unnoticed by Mike, I activated the voice recorder I had in my pocket. In the living room, I confronted Mike again. "So, what were your plans for today?" "It was supposed to be a business trip, of course." Mike started to yell again. I raised my voice in response. "Last time." Mike was taken aback. "Last time, you brought a woman into this house, didn't you?" "George told me." Mike glared at George, but George didn't notice, busy with his mobile phone and earphones. "I've explained to George already. She's just a subordinate, and I came back to pick up something I forgot while out." Mike's voice started to get rough again. "So it seems. But, you were arguing with that woman on another day, weren't you?" It sounded like he was looking for an excuse. "That's none of your business. I was just giving work guidance. It's not your place to criticize every little thing." As Mike stood up to yell again, George also rose slowly. "I saw that argument. It didn't seem like work guidance at all." George looked at his dad, Mike, with a questioning gaze, diminishing him. Overwhelmed by a pressure he hadn't felt before, Mike was silenced. "This prank call today, and the others we've had before." I handed Mike a piece of paper with phone numbers written on it. "I wrote these down from the caller ID every time we got a call." Mike started to panic as he looked at the numbers. "I want to check if this number is registered on your mobile phone." Mike avoided looking at the paper. "I don't know anything about that." And stayed still. "It's not about not knowing, let's just check. If you can't, then call this number." Mike's reaction confirmed my suspicion. He knew the person on the other end of those calls. As I stepped closer, Mike collapsed weakly to the floor. "I'm in trouble too." In a small voice, Mike began to explain. The relationship with that woman wasn't just boss and subordinate. She had a family, and they had been seeing each other, thinking they could keep it simple. But recently, she started pressing for divorce, and he was at a loss because he didn't want that. "It's a mistake on my part to get involved with a subordinate. I don't want to make a big deal out of it." There was no apology to me yet. "I won't see her again. Can you help me break it off with her?" Without responding, I asked for details about how long and the full story of their relationship. Mike, thinking I would help, shared everything. "This is the whole truth. Let's work together to end it with her. Who would want to with someone like you?" Before I could say it, George beat me to it and said it to Mike. "Dad, are you serious? That's the lowest." Seeing his own son say that, Mike looked at me with a nearly tearful face. "Really, the lowest? Who would help you? That's a joke." Mike looked back and forth between me and George, bewildered. "I'll be taking George and going back to my parents. We'll proceed with the necessary legal actions through a lawyer." With that, George and I left. Months later, the divorce between Mike and I was finalized. I submitted the voice recorder's recording as evidence, probably because he confessed to the affair himself. Mike readily agreed to the compensation and child support as per our demands. However, Mike's affair partner, Symes, was trouble. This woman was problematic. I sent a letter demanding compensation for the affair, which she refused. After repeated demands went unanswered, it led to mediation, where she only made outrageous claims. She insisted that her relationship with Mike was not an affair, but true love. She argued that there was nothing wrong with it since she planned to divorce her husband and marry Mike. She admitted to harassing me but blamed me for not leaving Mike, claiming it was my fault. She argued that the harassment was prompted by my jealousy and envy, placing the blame squarely on me. Eventually, when Mike brought up separation, her anger seemed directed at me. She was the one who made the false hospital call, but according to Symes, that too was my fault. In the end, She even winked at me saying, "Rosie, thanks for divorcing Mike," making the mediation session awkward. Of course, her claims were dismissed, and she was ordered to pay me compensation, but I felt a bit sorry for Mike, truly troubled by the whole situation. When her husband also demanded compensation, Symes exclaimed, "Why should I pay? If anything, I should be the one receiving compensation since I wanted the divorce." After receiving a clear explanation from the lawyer, her face turned pale. I worried about her future. Seeing her write acknowledgments and restrictions as directed by the lawyer resembled a child scolded by a parent doing homework. Mike really got entangled with a terrible woman. However, I no longer felt any desire to help or protect Mike. It all finally settled down a few months later. The compensation from Mike and Symes was paid in full, and with that money, George and I moved out to start a new life. Mike quit his job. After the divorce, Symes's intense appeal made their relationship public within the company, making it uncomfortable for him to stay. Symes resigned soon after and seemed to be turning into a stalker for Mike. Concerned about Symes's behavior, Mike has become reclusive. Even if he wanted to find a new job, it would be difficult at his age. The reason I know so much about my ex-husband is that I started working at the lunch delivery service again. Of course, I'm still delivering to the company where Mike used to work. I don't go on deliveries myself, but colleagues bring back stories. Gossip is indeed frightening. With that thought, I got ready to go home. Today is George's turn to cook. Now a senior in high school, George has decided to attend a culinary school, eagerly cooking on his assigned days. Sometimes we cook together, but George's cooking skills amaze me. Having been a housewife for so long, it's surprising he can make tastier and more efficiently prepared dishes than me. Gradually, enjoying George's cooking became my reason for living. "What's for dinner today?" As the town dims into the evening and homes light up, I walk home. Spotting the light leaking from our home, I quicken my pace. A different kind of happiness awaits inside that room. Smelling the delicious aroma of George's cooking, I open the door to the home where George waits.